Hello, everyone. It says I am live. Hey, she's grabbing her treat ahead of time. That's why I usually keep it in my pocket. What? Come here. Come say hi. Oh, you know where it is. You know what you want. Very food motivated dog. All right. I think we starve her. Lay down. Shake off. Lay down. Speak. Let's get a good one. Speak. That's all right. There you go. See, I have two people watching. Let me get the live chat going. There it is, live chat. Oh, my hair, what hair I have is getting unruly. It's time for a cutter to shave it right down again. Anyway, it's Gordon Causey. Today is, I'm going to look, is the 12th of May. It is 11:17 p.m. now, 2024. And I've been getting some comments from someone who's been watching this channel, watching my videos for a while, probably near the beginning. Certainly from before the station took off, when I had 100-ish subscribers back January, February. Now I'm up in around 900, which is incredible. Thank you to everyone who has subscribed to the channel. I really appreciate it. I talk about all manner of things. I kind of branded this podcast thing Act One, a Canadian take on news events. And this one individual, the name is Sharunian Allegiance. And I probably should look that up to see what Sharunian is, because I don't even know what Sharunian references. But the comments are always focusing in on news events that relate typically to Black America, which I don't have a lot of experience with. He or she, I'm not sure whether it's a male or a female. She, and just the name Sharunian makes me think of Sharon, so I tend to default to she, because regular viewers will know that in my world, the real world, there are two genders, male and female. So pardon me if I say she, and it's a guy. I've done that before with another commenter who I referred to as he, and it turned out that was a she. I get things mixed up. But at any rate, the comment was with respect to a real estate fund that was being run in Tulsa, Oklahoma. That was headed up by a Black financier. And apparently it ran into some trouble. And there was an investigation by the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission in the United States. I understand that at least the first investigation led to no action, charges, or anything. But anyway, it got me to thinking about race, because this isn't the only comment that Sharunian has put up that has been focused on issues that I would suspect are more focused on Black America. And I'm a white Canadian. But I do have some very fixed opinions on race and racism, and I thought I'd share them. But when someone's sharing their perspectives, their views, their opinions, it helps to know a little bit about the person, their background, their experience, and how they came, what their frame of reference is. So I've been asked before to, what's my background, what's my history, that kind of thing. And I've touched on it here and there. This will be a little more in detail. It's still going to be, I'm not going to go into big detail, but 1966, I was born in a small little town in Welland, Ontario called Port Colborne. That's where the hospital was. My family, we actually lived in a neighboring town called Ridgeway, too small to have a hospital. I was born in Port Colborne, nearby. That's the Niagara Falls region of Canada, near Crystal Beach, if anyone knows the area. And I don't remember it at all, because when I was 6 months old or thereabouts, before I was a year old, our family moved to New York City. My dad worked in finance. He worked for a large Canadian bank, and he was transferred down to New York City, to the Wall Street district. And we moved to Staten Island, New York, because it was pretty much, as I understand it, at least the stories that got shared through my parents, it was the only place they could really afford. And Staten Island was the street we lived in was all duplexes and quadplexes. There would be an upper and a lower, and I think we had the upper part of either a duplex or a quadplex, and we lived there for 2.5, 3 years, and I have no memory of it whatsoever. But we were there during some very interesting times that I learned about later, through history. We were there when Martin Luther King was shot, for example. Our next door neighbor, Mickey, was a New York City police cop from New York City. And on the night that Martin Luther King was shot back in 1968, so I would have been coming up on or somewhere around 2. I don't know the exact date that Martin Luther King was shot. I just know the year, 1968. The mayor of New York was a man by the name of John Lindsay. And on the evening that Martin Luther King was shot, he took a car and went down to Harlem and got out of the car and just started to walk the street. And apparently word spread like wildfire. You can read about this. I've read accounts post about what exactly happened that night. And he just started walking the streets, and word spread like wildfire throughout Harlem that the mayor is walking the street, and people started pouring out of their apartments, their homes, their residences, and were walking with him, probably hundreds of people. And that his gesture of just going and walking the streets is credited with having kept a lid on any potential violence, any potential reaction. Because you have to remember, Martin Luther King was the focal point, was the spearhead of the civil rights movement in the United States. And when he was assassinated, things blew up. Watts in LA, just anger. And there was looting and rioting and all kinds of things. And I believe as well in cities like Chicago and in Detroit, Watts was a particularly bad one. But in New York City, it was basically calm. And John Lindsay walking through the streets apparently kept things calm. That'll be significant later because around the age of 3, so in and around 1969, my dad got transferred back to Canada, back to Toronto, and we lived in Etobicoke, which is now part of Toronto, part of what they call the Six. There was City of Toronto, then there's Etobicoke, East York, North York, Scarborough. 6 different municipalities were amalgamated into Toronto, and Etobicoke is on the southwestern part of what is now Toronto. And we lived there, and I don't even think we lived there a year when they wanted my dad back in New York. And so we moved back to New York, but one thing, initially my dad didn't want to go, and so he refused, and so they've gotten to negotiations, and he was able to negotiate a significant wage increase. And as a result of that, we didn't have to live in Staten Island, and we moved to Bergen County, New Jersey. And the first place we lived was a little town called Wyckoff, and it was in Wyckoff that I entered kindergarten. So we're talking, it would have been 1970. We moved to Wyckoff, New Jersey. And we lived in that particular house for a year, a little bit of family history. The house that my father was renting, he was renting it from a pitcher on the New York Yankees by the name of Jim Bouton, who had a journeyman type career, nothing spectacular. He was a knuckleballer who was able to prolong his career by throwing knuckleballs. And he actually became somewhat famous afterward for a book he wrote, which was called Ball Four, which apparently exposed a number of secrets that, baseball players wouldn't talk about openly, kind of, in-house little Major League Baseball. He kind of pulled back the curtain a bit and let the great unwashed know a little bit about the behind the scenes stuff that happens with a Major League Baseball team like the Yankees. And he got into some trouble over it. He lost relationships, things like that. But at any rate, we'd been living in that house for a year, and then Jim Bouton, he was sent down to the minors, to Columbus. He wasn't performing well. And I gather he had a number of investment properties. And now that he's earning a minor league salary, didn't have the kind of guaranteed contracts they do now. He started to sell some of his investment properties, one of which was the house we lived in Wyckoff. And my dad, because we were living there, had the opportunity to buy it. But he had an inspection done on the house and found out there were termites in the foundation. Wasn't going to buy that house. And so we moved to a town right next door called Glen Rock, New Jersey. Again, still in Bergen County. And I kind of meld it when I'm talking. I talk about living in New Jersey just as, one experience, not Wyckoff and not Glen Rock. But I'd started kindergarten in Wyckoff. I went to kindergarten there. It was a private kindergarten run out of a church. And my memory isn't crystal clear. My best friend was David Hirschberger. My teacher was Mrs. Tinkerman. There was a significant Jewish population in the area. But in terms of racial diversity, I don't remember any. In the neighborhood I lived in. Then we moved to Glen Rock, New Jersey, a town over. And likewise, it did not have my neighborhood was lily white. There was no ethnic diversity whatsoever. Our next door neighbors were the Giulianis, who were Italian. That's about as close as you could get to diversity. And then the school I went to, and you can check these out, it's still around. I went down to my old school back in 2019, took a trip down to Glen Rock. Clara E. Coleman was the name of the school. And as I remember, in the entire school, there was only one black student. Her name was Kathy. I do remember that we did have a Vietnamese student. I don't remember her name. Remember Kathy, but I don't remember the Vietnamese student's name. But it was very, again, lily white. Johnny Appleseed, how well can I fight? Oh, I got into my share growing up because I was always the new kid. Yeah, he nailed it. I was always the new kid. Grade 1, I was the new kid. And then we stayed living in New Jersey, and I went to Clary Coleman School, grade 1 with Mrs. Vandenboig, grade 2 with Mrs. Zimmett, grade 3 with Miss Savisky, and then grade 4, my teacher was Mrs. Morton. And in grade 4, in October of grade 4, we moved again. My dad got transferred again to Toronto. This time we moved to Burlington. Burlington is on the western side. It's a suburb of Toronto to the west. And at that time, this would have been 1975 now. Burlington probably would be the western edge of the GTA. And I finished grade 4 and did all of grade 5 going to Pineland Public School. And as far as I know, it's still there. And at that school, in my classes, I do not remember one single ethnic minority. It was lily white. My best friend at that time was a kid named Michael Kovacetic, who I got into a fight with. initially. And he was actually German. His dad, his father, I believe it was his father, had fought in the Luftwaffe. There were pictures in his house of his dad in a Messerschmitt or one of the Nazi planes. I don't. You ask, Johnny Appleseed writes, so we will gild the lily. Help me out. I know what it means to gild the lily, to look at things through rose-colored glasses, but lily white. Okay, play on words. At any rate, so grade 4 and finishing grade 4, and then all of grade 5, Burlington, Ontario, lily white school. I don't remember any diversity there whatsoever. And then we moved to Portland, Oregon. My dad got transferred out to Portland, and we lived in a town called Beaverton. And now we're up to 19. We would have moved there in 1977 now. 1977, I'm living in Beaverton, Oregon, which is basically part of Portland. The way I understand it is our address was a Portland address, but we were physically within the confines of Beaverton, whatever the case. I went to the school that I went to, no longer exists. It was called Cedar Hills Public School. We lived in the Cedar Hills part of Beaverton. And again, now I'm in grade 6. Lily white, I don't remember any Black students at all. I do remember I had a friend named Jason who was Hispanic. I went over to his house a few times, and they spoke Spanish in the house, kind of Spanglish, Spanish and English munched together. But we were only there 1 year, and it was there that my dad quit his job with the bank he'd been working with. He was tired of all this jumping around. He didn't like living in Portland, Oregon. We had no family whatsoever. We're all Canadian. My parents are both Canadian, so, and they were tired of it. They wanted to move back. For my own personal self, I probably was more of an American. I had more American sensibilities than Canadian at 11 years of age. I'd grown up saying, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God. We still said that back then. One nation under God, indivisible, with justice and liberty for all. And then sing My Country 'Tis of Thee. But then we moved again, and we moved to, in 1978, 1 year later, we moved to Pickering, Ontario. And now for the first time, I started to get a taste of diversity, but it wasn't huge. I can probably name all the kids in my school in grade 7 and 8. I went to a school called Frenchman's Bay Public. There was Spencer, there was Troy, there was Curtis, and that might be it. And Nigel. Four kids I remember who were Black. 4 guys. I can't remember any girls who were Black. And I knew there was another student. Her name was Amika, and she was Indian. But we're talking about in my grade 7 year, there were around 100 students. So the diversity, we're talking about 4 or 5%, less than 10, certainly less than 10, because I have to allow that maybe my memory isn't perfect. So, and I do remember a specific experience I had with Curtis, who was a friend of mine. We used to hang out together. And one day at school, would have been grade 7 or 8. And Brian, another kid, a white kid, had burned me. He'd come up to me and he said, "Hey, Causey, how tall are you?" And I don't know how tall I was back then, 5'3", 5'4", or whatever I was. And I told him, I said, "Oh, I'm 5'3", 5'4", whatever. And then Brian said, "I didn't know shit piled that high. Ha ha ha, burn," right? Like you do when you're 12 and 13 years of age. So he burned me. Well, I wanted to burn someone else with the same joke. So I told it to Curtis. And I said to Curtis, I said, "Hey, Curtis, how tall are you?" Curtis was taller than me. He was like 5'6", 5'7", at least. He was a tall, lanky kid. And he said, 5'6", 5'7", whatever he was. And I hit him with the line. I said, "No, I didn't know shit piled that high." Well, Curtis, took it as a racist slur. He thought I was being racist. And he and I actually went at it. And I don't know how, but I think it was just because he was so angry. He saw red. And I managed to pin him down on the ground. And I was like, "Curtis, I didn't meet, Brian told it to me. I'm just telling it to you. It's a joke. Chill." I've been a harbinger of things to come, about how hypersensitive we've become. So then I go to high school, Dumbarton High School in Pickering. Our moving was done. And the school was predominantly white, but things were changing now. We now entered into fully into what I'll call the Trudeau era. Trudeau had come in as Canada's prime minister in 1968, and he had liberalized Canada's immigration policies and had opened up immigration to a much wider segment of the global population than had heretofore been allowed in. For years, Canadian immigration was centered on Britain and Western Europe. And that policy of fixating on white Europeans in seeking immigrants to Canada had gone back hundreds of years. I remember learning about it in history. There was a Canadian politician by the name of Selkirk, Selkirk. And it was considered, now historically looking backwards, it's often referred to as a racist period of Canadian history. And as I came to the end of high school, back in my era, high school went all the way to grade 13, didn't end in grade 12. They got rid of that sometime in around 1990, I think, or even 95. It was sometime in the 90s that they eliminated grade 13. But it and you began to see a more racially diverse classroom. The school was much more racially diverse than it had been as time went on. And I was a basketball player. I was a total baller. I love playing basketball. I still play on occasion. I don't do that well anymore. My knees are shot and whatever. But basketball always had a lot of black kids played basketball, and for whatever reason. And Johnny Appleseed asks if Lily White is better than Lily Livered. But anyway, I wanted to get on to something, a couple things that happened to me, a couple experiences I had. One when I was in grade 10 or 11, one of those 2 years, when I was 15 or 16 years of age. Dukes of Hazzard was a popular TV show. Daisy Duke and Bo and Luke Duke and Scooter, Uncle Jesse, Roscoe, Enos. You can tell I watched it a couple times. Anyway, the General Lee, who was the general of the Confederate forces in the U.S. Civil War, that was the name of their car. I think it was a Dodge Charger, maybe. And it was painted as a representation of the Confederate flag. Just going to read what Jason wrote. Happy Sunday to you too, Jason. So, and I saw that flag, I saw that Confederate flag as being rebellious, as being, thumbing your nose at authority, which is what the whole Dukes of Hazzard show was about. And so I was at a flea market and I saw a Confederate flag for sale, and I bought it, brought it home, and I hung it over my bed. And my mother saw it and she told me to get that racist symbol out of the house. She didn't want to see it. And I, 15, 16-year-old, rebellious, what 15, 16-year-old isn't. I argued with her, and then she took me through the history of the U.S. Civil War. And there are individuals who are apologetic for the Southern states, and they say that it wasn't about slavery, it wasn't about economics. And it's like, yeah, sure, okay, economics. The South didn't want to pay the help. And that war was over slavery. And there's no question. If anyone wants to argue that point, was there an economic component to it? Sure. Yeah, the economics of slavery, of having a workforce that you didn't have to compensate with wages. You just gave them living quarters and they were your property. And economically, the more slaves you owned, the more wealthy and prosperous you were. And I learned the history. Anyway, I took the flag down, took it back to that same flea market and swapped it and got a Canadian flag, put the Canadian flag over my bed. However, at this time, I would have to admit, if I'm going to be honest with myself, that I had somewhat racist inclinations. At that time, it was the 1980s now, and there was a debate raging in the press over race-based crime statistics. And apparently Toronto Police Services kept race-based police statistics, but they weren't being widely released or released at all. And the Toronto Sun was a newspaper that I frequently read, because on page 3 they had a pinup girl, and I would read the paper, and they had some very right-wing, extreme right-wing commentators. And if you think about it, and I'm approaching it from like a 15, 16-year-old mentality, if the population of Toronto, let's say at that time it was 10% Black, then you would expect, all things being equal, that 10% of, say, violent crime would be committed by people who are Black. But the reporting was indicating that Black individuals were disproportionately responsible for violent crime. And there was this whole notion that it was, this information was being suppressed. And again, if I'm being honest, at the time, my thinking at that time, I asked myself, I considered it possible that there could be a link between race and criminal behavior, that certain races might be more disposed to criminality than other races. Disgusting thoughts in today's world, and I actually repudiate them now. But if I'm being honest and looking back at myself and the way I thought when I was 14, 15, 16 years old, maybe even 17, these attitudes get ingrained. And I could talk on why I totally repudiate it now. And it's simply the way I view humanity now is white, Black, brown, yellow, any race doesn't matter. We're all broken. We're all fallen. We're all prone to criminality. And it's simply a question of circumstance in a lot of cases. Just going to read. Morgan Freeman said racism will go away when fear mongers keep bringing it up. Simple as that. We are all different. And then Jason goes on to say, meant stop bringing up when fear mongers stop bringing it up. Johnny Appleseed says, stop being honest, bull roar. I don't know what he's talking about, bull roar. I'm going to be honest. I'm going to give you my straight take on things. And then, I went on to university at York University. Things became much more ethnically diverse. I was exposed to people from my neighbor, Amy, who I think she was from Malaysia. A lot of students coming in from different parts of the world. And you broaden your experience. And you learn that there are people, I don't know exactly how to put it into words, but at the end of the day now, I view racism as being brain dead stupid. Johnny Appleseed says, we are not prone to criminality. I think all humanity is. I think it's a question of opportunity. I think it's a question of necessity, and I also think it's a question of opportunity. Or I think what keeps a lot of people from committing crimes is punishment. Dostoevsky, his famous book, Crime and Punishment, is if someone, regardless of race, if someone could commit a crime with absolutely zero risk of any repercussions, I think we would find out how prone to all manner of evil conduct we can become. And it's only fear of retribution that keeps many people in line. When we look at things, I mean, this is going to go off of I'm going to leave the racial stuff aside. I mean, when we look at something like Epstein's Island, where I don't want to name any names because I'm not 100% sure of what names are on the list, but we're talking I know Bill Gates is on the list of people who have chummed around. Bill Clinton. I said I wasn't going to name names. Now I'm throwing them out there. Donald Trump. All manner of individuals have gone down to that little island that Jeffrey Epstein had. And how many of them figured that they were untouchable? That they could get away with it because of their wealth, their power, their influence, I think that, and I think it's easy for people to sit back and say, well, I never would have. It's like it's like that 98-pound weakling who talks about how, I'd pound that guy out. No, you wouldn't. You'd get killed. I saw a recent video with Jordan Peterson talking about how everyone likes to think that, during the era of Nazi Germany, that they would have been the Oskar Schindler, that they would have been the ones hiding the Anne Frank family and trying to protect people and being all good and virtuous. But the simple fact of the matter is that the vast majority of humanity goes the other way. And, he brought up the fact that, now I don't know where he got the statistic from, but he said 30% of Canadians were thrilled at being able to snitch on their fellow citizens, on their friends and neighbors, over masking or distancing or having people in the backyard, that they just couldn't wait to, So the propensity toward evil, I think it's ingrained in us. Johnny Appleseed is, are you suggesting original sin? You know what? I realize that most of the world is secular. We're not, Canada is not a Christian nation. No semblance of it, hardly, at all. And so, and I don't think you have to go down that route. I think there's, reading the story of Genesis, and about Eve being tempted by Satan, I think that's something that is a recurring theme throughout all of human history and throughout each individual's history. We're all tempted. You can be as God. You can decide what is right and wrong. You can be a God unto yourself. And I think that's when we look at something like Epstein's Island, the fear of being caught, because someone brought that up. Jason King says punishment is needed. But we live in a secular world now where the notion of a creator God has been replaced by this idea that we just all evolved from microbes out of the primordial soup, and that there's no first mover beyond the Big Bang, that everything is just a random accident. And in a world like that, where that's the predominating cultural view, that life is ultimately meaningless, everything's existential, it's all based on you have to find your own personal existential meaning, because there's no broad overreaching meaning to life. So life can mean whatever you want it to mean. So in this type of secular humanist world, and where why fear retribution? There is no judgment, there is no God, everything's just random accidents. So where are we going? Jason King says life will be better for us when we have one rule and not rulers. I've been thinking about this a fair bit lately, about the situation in Israel and Palestine is a prime example. And I don't view the Israelis as being super virtuous or super evil. And I don't view the Palestinians as being super virtuous or super evil. I think that equally both populations are as prone to evil and good as the other. And man, oh man, am I ever going all over the place like I like to do. Johnny Appleseed is suggesting I listen to Christopher Hitchens for a change. Johnny Appleseed says, I'm generalizing on how I see things. Well, give me something specific where you think I'm generalizing. If you think I'm generalizing too much and you want to know something specific, hit me and I'll see what I can do. In terms of getting back to the central point about racism and about my evolution from having somewhat racist inclinations to now I'm the father of 3 interracial kids. And I actually don't like talking about race, to go back to what someone said about Jason King talking about Morgan Freeman. That was a famous interview he did with, I forget, Harry Reasoner, Morley Safer, whichever one of the 60 Minutes guys, can't remember his name. It's bugging me that I can't remember his name, but doesn't matter. He's Jewish, the gentleman who was interviewing him, and he said something about Black History Month, and Morgan Freeman didn't want to have his, Black history to have a specific month. And I tend to agree with Morgan Freeman. I would like to get past that world. But how do you get past that world when you still have so many people who see things through a racial lens? I have a neighbor who lives across the street from me who still uses the N word. And I'm like, come on. And I don't want to talk to you anymore. That's it. Snap. He doesn't, I don't like those people. He has told me point blank. And that attitude, I think, is held by a lot of people. And at least this gentleman who lives across the street from me is at least honest enough to say it out loud. I think a lot of people think it without uttering it. And how do you get past that? And I do think things like Black History Month and what do they call it? Diversity, equity, and something, DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusiveness. These DEI rules, I actually think they further ingrain racist attitudes. They get people's back up. And it makes, rather than making things better, it makes things worse. But I know where I want to go with this now. I got to get on to it. Okay, Johnny Appleseed asked me not to be careful not to simplify other perspectives. Dan Rather, thank you. and Johnny Appleseed has been a big, huge help to me now because it's DEI, diversity, equity, inclusivity, or inclusiveness. Yeah, and this stuff is making things worse rather than making it better. But it comes down to something that I think is just instinctive in human nature, and that's tribalism. I think tribalism is kind of the default position of the human race, regardless of whether you're white, black, brown, whatever. We are humanity, regardless of race or anything. We are tribal creatures by nature. And that tribe can be, we can try to identify with a group tribally, and it can be based on race. It can also be based on religion. It can be based on language. It can be based on any number of things. During the COVID era, those of us who, I heard the comment so many times amongst those like myself who didn't mask, didn't get jabbed, and would go and gather and protest and go to the rallies and things like that. And people say, oh, I'm with my tribe. I found my tribe. And this is a central core element of humanity, is we want to be with our tribe. And however we want to distinguish our tribe, again, could be racial, could be language, could be religion, could be, for some it's sexuality. Oh, I'm with my tribe now. A military squad can be tribal, absolutely. We all wear the uniform. Brothers in arms. There's a tribal aspect to humanity, and things can get dangerous, because when you're tribalistic in nature, regardless of how you differentiate your tribe, then there's a tendency to elevate your own tribe and to denigrate the other tribe. Look at the jabs. I'm pure blood. I didn't get the COVID jab, so I'm pure. Meaning inferring that anyone who got the COVID jabs, that they are not pure, they are impure. And what would you rather be? Would you rather be pure or impure? And there's a distinction, and they're not part of my tribe. And we can break this down in so many different ways. You can look at the conflict that's raging between Israel and the Palestinians. It's tribal in nature. There's the Israeli tribe against the Palestinian tribe, and everyone's trying to equate one group as being all virtuous and the other group as being all evil, when I've actually thought more recently on it and thought, at the end of the day, Benjamin Netanyahu and his right-wing war cabinet, the Hawks, who are all bent on prosecuting this war to the end, no matter what the cost is to the Palestinian population. And then you have Hamas, who will never surrender and will never repudiate their desire to wipe Israel off the map. And who's caught in the crosshairs are the innocent Israeli population and the innocent Palestinian population. And it's almost like I think we should take Benjamin Netanyahu and his ultra war hawks and put them in a room with Hamas and all their individuals who want Israel wiped off the map from the river to the sea, and let them go at each other. Never happened. Never happened in any other conflict in history. So, ultimately, I think what it comes down to with racism, it's just part of our tribalistic inclination towards wanting to surround ourselves with people who we view as being like us. Sharunian says that I'm married to a woman of color. Yes, I am. And there's Sharunian, was kind of the impetus for this video. Pro-Black is benevolent in Black American community. It's one thing when we're talking about the United States. I've been back a number of times. 2019 was the last time. And then COVID came along, and I wasn't allowed to go into the United States because I didn't have a vaccine. So I was precluded, barred from entering the United States for I don't know how long. I don't know when they finally lifted that, 2022, 2023, whenever it was. But 2016, I think, I went down to Virginia Beach, Hampton Roads area, Virginia. And I'm a very friendly, outgoing, extroverted type of guy, and I smoke. And I went down, I would go down, you can't smoke in the hotel, so I would go outside and I would smoke. And there would be other smokers out there, other people just lounging around, and I would always engage people in conversation. And I didn't care white, black, or otherwise. And when I noticed that when I engaged with white, it was almost always Americans. When I engaged with white Americans, very friendly. When I engaged with Black Americans, I found there was a bit of a wall up. And so great day, and then, good day, nice weather. And I go, so you're staying here long or whatever, just trying to make conversation. I go, I'm going to be here a couple of days. But there was a reticence. There was a lack of openness. So I would say, where are you visiting from? Oh, I'm coming up from Carolina, visiting my sister. What about you? And as soon as I said, well, I'm from Canada, then the wall came tumbling down. Then they were super friendly. But when they assumed I wasn't American or didn't know, there was very much, I found, a reticence to, the wall gets put up on both sides. I wanted to talk to something that Sharunian Allegiance wrote, though. Pro-Black is benevolent in the Black American community. The video that I watched just recently, Sharunian had sent me asking about this Tulsa investment fund that invests in real estate, and it's headed up by a Black financier. And apparently it's had issues and, again, investigations by the Securities and Exchange Commission, what have you. And I didn't read too much up on it, but it had also attracted one prominent, who I assume is a gentleman, another a wealthy Black gentleman had invested in it simply because it was a Black fund and he wants to support the Black community. And this is something you would see in various communities, not just the Black community, but in the Jewish community, in the Italian community, in the Irish community. You support your own. And I think there was a concerted effort in the 60s and 70s that sought to undermine that type of collective community building up in the Black community. That I think there were, there's a great book written by a guy named Manning who talked about how the communist Russia, Soviet Union, had infiltrated the Black political movement to sow division in the United States of America and divisions along race. And the reason they wanted to do that, why would the Soviet Union care about sowing racial division in the United States? Because a house divided against itself cannot stand. And I probably have the book. I think it's somewhere on this table over here. I think his name was Eli Manning. And fantastic book. And he had been to Moscow, and he wrote about the fact that when the Black community got together, they wanted to, in New York City, you would have a Hebrew hospital, an Italian hospital. These communities, ethnic communities, would get together, fundraise, and create something like a hospital, for example. And so the Black community was looking to do the same thing, but on direction from Moscow, with senior leaders in the Black American movement were discouraged from doing this and actually were torpedoed it because they wanted to keep this fighting going on. If you ever get a chance to read that book, please do. Biscuit 89 says plenty of white Americans who are garbage. True. Plenty of white Americans are garbage. There's garbage enough to go around in every group. Shrunian retracted the message that Shibun Lover, she's I'm not going to read that. Okay, Crystal P is saying search up the term bedwench slave master. I don't think I have to do any searching on that to see what it's about. Johnny Appleseed, let's keep this between the lines. Sharunian writes, Jay Morrison has exposed how he started the Tulsa Real Estate Fund, found in 2016 in Atlanta. He filed for bankruptcy when he started, LOL. Boyce Watkins co-signed the fund and tried to tell other Blacks to invest forward. Years later, people lost so much money, he does not want to take accountability. Okay. Well, I'll tell you something, within every community, doesn't matter. I mean, humanity has fallen. And we got the Bernie Madoffs. We got all kinds of individuals who aspire to living a rich and wealthy lifestyle. And these financial instruments like funds, real estate funds, where you crowdsource and you say to people, you give me 10, you give me 20, let me get hundreds of people to invest. And it's not as hard as you might think. If you can get 15, 20 people, it's an old doubling effect. You can get 15 people to all invest, say 10 grand each. Now you have 150,000. But if beyond those 15 people, if each one of them can bring in two, and if you're talking about someone who has $10,000 to invest in a real estate fund, chances are they've got friends who have cash, disposable cash as well, cash that they can put at risk, and you can get them, and then you can just you can. It's not as difficult as it might seem to get to get tens, even hundreds of millions of dollars accumulated, and then you have all that money, and until someone wants to take their money out, anything is just notional. You can buy a property for $100,000, and then you can say in a year that it's now worth 120. And people say, "Oh, great! I've made a 20%, return on my investment." Well, it's not $120,000 unless someone actually pays $120,000 for it. We're seeing that with the Donald Trump trial. Trump went to the banks and he said, "Here, I have these properties. They're worth $500 million. Then it's up to the bank to say, all right, let's do our due diligence and see if we think they're really worth that. No, we only think they're worth 300 million, so we're only going to lend you 250 million. But the banks said, all right, you say they're worth 500 million, we'll lend it to you. And now they accuse Trump of fraud over the fact that the banks accepted, that the banks are basically saying they didn't do their due diligence. And anyway, going on to what Sharunya is saying, the thing is, funds, the only thing I will say to you, Sharunya, is that funds overwhelmingly fail. Overwhelmingly. Bad management doesn't necessarily have to be fraud. Just because someone's bad at their job doesn't mean that they're criminally negligent. They can just be bad at their job. I watched a little bit of that interview with this Boyce Watkins, who had put in, at least he said he put in $10,000. And I watched a bit of that interview with him being interviewed. And, he framed it as he wanted to invest in a black business. But I'm going off topics. Jason King says not a single race has never been enslaved. True. Look at the Barbary Coast during the early days of the United States of America. White slave trade. American merchant ships were traveling along and through the Mediterranean, along the North African coast, and the Barbary raiders would capture them, enslave them. The women would be sold as sex slaves. I mean, no race. We're all prone to evil, regardless of how much melanin is in our skin. Jason, thank you. Although this isn't the greatest video, I'm just kind of rambling all over the place. I was toying with the idea of doing one tonight and talking about the fact that I think it's 1948 all over again. It's like, the land of it, what we call Israel today, what was called Palestine until 1948. It's like 1948, 1949 all over again. Let's just have a war and see who wins control over the land. Just do a do-over. They had a war in 1948 to 1949, and the wars never stopped. 40 below says, I'm late to the chat, but the subject's interests 40 below. Here on Guam, about 15% of the population is white, like me. Most are islanders and Asians. Intermarriages, like mine, promotes the erosion of racism. Absolutely agree with you. I love that. If you ever want to watch a great movie starring Warren Beatty and Halle Berry, and a number of other actors, Paul Sorvino, I think, is in it, and another one of my favorite actors, and Olivet, I think is his name, great character actor. Anyway, it's called Bulworth. And one of the things Senator James T. Bulworth, or whatever his name is, mentions is he says, I think we should all keep each other until we're all the same color. And it's funny, Canada is thought of as a very multicultural and, with a lot of mixing. Go down to the Caribbean, go down to Trinidad, where in Trinidad, there have been Portuguese, Dutch, Asian, Indian, French, Spanish, everyone. You talk about a melting pot, but it goes back to the 1500s. It's over 500 years that this mixing has been going on, and Trinidadian women are gorgeous. And I think the reason Trinidadian women are so incredibly beautiful is because their gene pool is so incredibly deep. Dutch, African, Asian, European, everything mixing together. And anyway, Sharunian says, mentions that my wife is Tamil from Sri Lanka. Yeah, true. Thank you for that, Sharunian. I didn't take it that way, but I can. It is what it is. I try to see the best in things, and I sometimes miss stuff because call it naivete if you like. But it's interesting that in Tamils in Sri Lanka there are two principal racial divisions within Sri Lanka. There's the Tamil and the Sinhalese. And Sinhalese tend to be lighter complexion, and Tamil tend to be darker complexion. And you've heard of the caste system, no doubt, in India, where lighter skin was valued more over darker skin. And it would determine your place on the social order. And sadly, to me, it's not a question of racism. It's a question of tribalism. People, we seek to other people. We seek to make another group the other. And we want to surround ourselves with people like us. There's a great thing that I would invite you to read up on. Bacon's rebellion in the Virginia colony. It might have been probably was in the 1600s. And what happened was all the landowners and all the plantation owners and such were white, but they had indentured, basically slaves coming from Europe. They would be called indentured servants. So they're just, marginally, technically better than being an African slave, but in real world difference, they're, the blacks and the indentured servants from England and Scotland and Ireland were really they didn't have their quality of life was the same as the African Americans, and I'm comfortable in this sense calling them African Americans because these are people who were either were born in Africa or their parents or grandparents had been born in Africa, and then there were the Native American. Then there was the Native American population, the First Nations, what for Indians from North American Indians, and the three groups got together, and there was a rebellion called Bacon's Rebellion, and eventually the rebellion was put down, but then they created the slave police. They created a racially divided group for whites to police runaway slaves, and kind of gave them a little, a more tangible, a more visible leg up over. And they created, divide and conquer, because they saw the Native North American Indians, the black slaves, the white indentured servants far exceeded the number of the wealthy, and so divide and conquer. They created a division between the white indentured servants and the black African slaves, and Bob's your uncle. Now they can divide the opposition that would threaten their wealth, power, influence. And there you go. I've got Lamph, and I'm seeing a Star of David and what appears to be, these are emojis, coffins. You can take that two different ways. Oh, Shrunian Allegiance says there's some beautiful black sisters out there too. Absolutely. I mean, I mentioned Halle Berry. That movie Bulworth, that's when, but anything she's been in, Halle Berry is one incredibly beautiful woman. Johnny Appleseed, you'll dwell on your original swing, Gordon. It is contestable. Only through the blood of Christ. Dirt level, imagine marrying a. Please, what are with these comments? Sharunian says the offspring of black and white is mulatto, then mixed race mulatto, and then white is. You know what? We're all, at the end of the day, we're all human beings. No, I have not read Quadroon Ball's story based on discrimination. Quadroon face in Louisiana. Lamp is being asked to mute, or Lamp is saying something about mute. Jason King is Dutch, Irish, Ukrainian, first generation Canadian. I'm Canadian. My background, my dad's parents, my dad's dad was British, England. My dad's mom, my grandmother, was Welsh from Cardiff, Wales. On my mom's side, my mom's mom, O'Malley, was Irish. And dad, Gray, my mom's dad, Gray, was Scottish. So I've got England, Ireland, Scotland, Wales. And then on my dad's side, my great-grandmother married an Englishman by the name of La Rochelle, which is a French name, although he was British. So I think it's possible that going back in the lineage, there might be a French connection. 40 below, Philippians often walk under umbrellas during sunny days. I think you mean perhaps Filipinos. Darker tan skin was associated with outdoor field workers. The desired lighter skin had nothing to do with race, just occupation. Fair enough. I think you might mean Filipinos. Johnny Appleseed just writes, pay your taxes. Look, I've gone on for over an hour with no point, but it was fun. I appreciate everyone chiming in. Anyone want to talk about anything else? I'm going to head to bed soon. And I think I'll do my next video. We'll be talking about, it's 1948, 1949 all over again in Israel. In Palestine, call it whatever you want, call it the Ottoman district of Syria, call it whatever, call it the Levant. There's it's 1948, 1949 all over again. Let's have a reset. There's a big word. Let's have a redo, a do-over. We can have Britain administer the territory for 3 months, then we can have them vacate, and then we can once again say, okay, you guys fight it out and we'll see who wins this time. Anyway, Jason King thinks it was fun. Glad. Anyway, appreciate y'all very much, and thank you for the likes, and thank you. If I get any subscriptions out of this video, I'll be surprised, but 900 is something for this. So we'll talk to you all again later. Good night.